If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniak. When I was younger, about 10 years ago, I gotten into bird watching. I was about 12, so it wasn't really official by any means. I was just some kid that liked to sneak up on birds, grab a quick picture, and look them up in books. I decided to start this hobby with making a list, with pictures I'd printed from the library, or of native birds in my region. Every weekend, I'd be wandering around my neighborhood in search of new birds, with a few ponds and a large creek in my area. I found quite a few within my first few weeks. However, there was one bird that was sort of a white whale due to its rarity in the area, a black vulture. We have tons of vultures in the area, well, turkey vultures. They're common, but far fewer black vultures. It's a bit hard to tell the difference if they're flying too high. The best way to determine which vulture is what is to do with how much grey white is under their wings. If they get closer, you can eventually make out the red head of the turkey vultures, of which I did so often, disappointingly. Now unfortunately, I cannot remember the exact date, or what month it was even, but one weekend, I decided to spend the next few days searching high and low for the black vulture. I went climbing all over the small wire fencing around a nearby bushy area, as usual, and searched. Now usually, you had to be lucky to find scavenger birds on roadkill. Besides a road, there are so many small things around, like 2 lanes that mirrored the creek nearby through some foliage. So I just cut across a sort of mini forest, heading in that direction. As much as it made me sad to see a dead deer or possum, it was a common sight on this road, as both sides are now open, with trees and undergrowth almost choking it. There are some parts of the road that almost become a tunnel due to leaves intertwining above. It's incredibly easy for a deer or some other animal to jump out in front of a car in the dark, not realizing it's too late. I didn't have much luck. There are far fewer crows or anything nearby. I see a few ducks swimming in the creek besides me. Nothing big. It started getting late now, but the sun's up. Despite the dangers of walking down a forest road in the dark, I was determined to stay out as long as possible. I decided to reach a small park area at the end of the road, and then I'd be making my way back. I went under a small tunnel of leaves, back out on the other side, delighted to see the familiar shape of a large bird circling in the sky. It was just the right shape and size to be a vulture, yet I had no hope of checking for the greyness of its feathers. Sunlight is limited. Instead, I was stuck following it as it slowly began to sink lower and lower. After about 10 or so minutes, it landed. I then carefully snuck forward, casually and cautiously avoiding anything that could alert the bird of my presence. I now had sunk low to the ground, realizing that the bird had landed in a small clearing at the far end of the park. It's just a small, open field, slightly tilted down a hill, with the parking lot on top. I've been there before, as it's a fun spot for kids to roll down because how steep it is. I approached from the bottom, excitement brimming, when I heard several squawks and shrieks of other birds. Now black vultures are far more aggressive than turkeys. I was hoping to catch a spat. I get to the edge of the clearing, pull out my binoculars. Two things hit me at once. One, I found it odd that they're in the middle of the park, rather than closer to the road, where you'd normally assume to find some roadkill, though I reason that things can die anywhere, even in the middle of a park. However, it smelled awful. The scent was rather light, but I'd been known to have a really sensitive nose. But something about this didn't smell right. Not like any other roadkill I've smelled before. When I put the binoculars to my eyes, I expected to see a deer corpse and two birds fighting. Never in a million years did I think I'd see a corpse of a complete different kind. The birds were there. I remembered the faint fang of excitement I still had, recognizing the proud head of the black vulture, before the image of it sitting on the chest of a naked woman sucked all the life out of me. I was frozen. I could not look away. My throat tightened with vomit. I could not look away. The bird had done surprisingly little to her. She had what appeared to be cuts, but most of her waist was intact. What wasn't the bird's rat? It was a horrifying sight, one that I will never forget. I can see the image so clear now. She was pale, with blonde hair. I sat there, stupidly, for who knows how long, as the sun began to sink over the trees. This was the time before cell phones were common, and I had the quiet hike back home now. I realize now that I'm in shock, and I could only move when the sudden fear that whatever did this could be directly behind me forces itself upon me. I begin to slowly waddle backwards into the trees, not taking my eyes off the body for a second. I did not want to turn around. For some reason, I was so scared somebody would be behind me that I just backed up forever. Maybe nothing would happen. It was now dusk, and suddenly, high beams appear from over the top of the hill. I then heard the screech of tires as a car wheeled out, and I listened to it veer off left, away down the road, opposite to the direction of which I'm heading. That was the last straw. I ran the entire way back the second that I could no longer hear it. I crashed through at least a mile of brush, and while I was smart enough to have some boots on, my arms were not covered and began bleeding. I stopped. I paused midway through the brush by my home, realizing that, embarrassingly, I wet myself in fear. I then crawled through people's yards to get to my house. Now the horror didn't completely end there. I was home alone until past midnight, as my mum worked late at a diner. To this day, I have regrets as to why I did not immediately call the police. I instead lock all the doors, double check, take a shower, and lock myself in my bedroom. I'd fallen asleep, somehow, by the time my mum came home. I confronted her in the morning. At least, by that time, when we made the call together, the body had already been found. They took my statement, but we never got any calls back. So I was out there, searching for a creature amongst animals, but the monster that I did find, or almost found me should I say, will forever haunt me and be far more terrorizing. About 2 years ago, I finally moved into a brand new home in a brand new estate in Australia. I was one of the first to have a finished building in the area and was able to finally grace my independence. The first few weeks went by as normal. During that time, I'd often take walks alone with the dog in the afternoons and roam around the estate area. All the roads around us had been practically completed, and all the other properties were marked out. But no other houses were built excluding one, directly opposite mine. The home appeared finished, but there was no driveway laid yet. From what I gathered, no one lived there. Up to the left of my home, roughly a few hundred meters away, was a field with a huge hill upon it. I later found out that the whole area was council property. Not only was no one allowed to build up there, but the whole hill was basically a no-go zone. For whatever reason, the council just didn't want people up there, so the whole area was surrounded by a huge fence. The only other notable feature in the area was a small abandoned farmhouse with a shed a few kilometers down the road. I knew nothing about it, and often went walking there with the dog, as it gave me something mild to explore amongst the vast nothingness that I lived around. The entire place was abandoned and completely uninhabitable, but still interesting nonetheless. About a month or two after moving in, I awoke one morning to the sound of a violin. It was extremely distant and quite haunting. I actually enjoyed it, assuming the neighbours opposite me had moved in. Excited that I finally had people to talk to, I looked out the curtain, seeing that the house is still vacant as it ever was. I get dressed. By the time I look out, the violin ceased. Now this happened roughly every second day for every week. The violin would wake me up, then disappear about a minute later. I'd ignored it, to the point my curiosity got the better of me. The next morning, when I heard the violin play again, I instantly jumped out of bed, threw on my dressing gown, shot to the front door. I look, and there up on the hill, someone's playing a violin. It was barely light, but the person appeared very tall from the distance I was at. They are doing what can only be described as a waltz type walk, spinning slowly in a circle as they are playing. I took my eyes off the person and walked over to pick up the morning paper. In the 10 seconds it takes me, I hear the violin stop. When I look up, I notice the figure was no longer playing or dancing, but now standing still, most likely looking in my direction. It was so dark I couldn't make out any more. We both stood there for half a minute, not moving before the creeps got the better of me, so I hid back inside. After that morning, things started happening. On my walks, I began to notice footprints on the surrounding properties that were not made by me, that I also hadn't seen before, which I was just assuming were from people walking up from other houses and down the road. I never awoke to the violin, but I swore I could hear someone walking on the street next to my bedroom windows in the early mornings. However, I never saw a thing. There were other things generally, like random tools such as spades and rakes lying around the area that I guessed were left there by construction crews, none of which I ever saw. I then started getting calls at work and would immediately be hung up on. I also stopped walking up to the farmhouse that was abandoned, as the experience with the violin had shaken me. One night, as I'm heading to bed, I turn off the television in the living room and again could hear the faint sound of a violin playing. However, it sounded more muffled and somewhat rehearsed. I froze. A cold chill flowed through me instantaneously, considering that it's about midnight and not the usual time I'd hear it playing. I went to the front window and peeked out, and there was a light in the house opposite mine. It was clearly a candle, as I could see the dim light flickering in the empty window, and music sounded as though it was coming from an old record player. But in the 10 minutes I watched, I never saw any movement from inside. I moved away from the window, sufficiently freaked out now. Another 5 minutes passed. I hear the music stop abruptly. I look out the window again and notice that the light's out now. I never saw anyone. I began to become unsettled in the house, often inviting friends over, but of course, nothing would ever happen when someone else was with me. I never bothered to tell any of my friends, as without evidence, they'd think I was crazy. But nothing compared to what happened next. In my living area, the desk sits right next to a small window which looks out to my fence surrounding my property. The steel fence is literally an arm's length away from the home and about 6 feet tall, so I figured that, unlike most other windows, I'd never need to cover this one with a sheet or blanket because no one's seeing in. I usually had headphones on. When I played, I always had the lights off. For no other reason than I preferred to play games in the dark. So one night as I'm gaming, I get up, walk to the dark side of the kitchen, grab a beer out of the fridge. It was dead silent, excluding the faint sound of my headphones. As I closed the fridge and turned to face the desk, I saw directly out of the window two very, very faint lights. I didn't even catch on to it immediately, starting to walk back to the desk, fixated on the small glowing balls. It wasn't until I had my nose almost pressed against the glass that I realised The two lights weren't lights at all. They're eyes. So now, there's a set of eyes sitting just above the fence line, staring wide open at me. They don't blink. They don't move. My entire body locks up. All I can do is stare back as my brain is still comprehending, why is there a person staring at me in the scariest possible way I can ever imagine? I don't know what happened. Either my head kicked into gear, or my muscles loosened, but my body automatically collapsed and I fell to the ground, scurrying to hide against the wall, away from the window. I could hear my heart beating through the carpet like a drum, as I lay as flat as possible, as my mind is still processing the sheer severity of the situation. A violin begins playing. The violin is haunting me with a tune that's beginning to emanate, except this time, it's directly outside my window, and much louder than I've heard it before. Now the lights are still off. I wanted to get up to turn my PC screen off, so I can't be seen, but my whole body is not cooperating. Not only was the sound of the instrument extraordinarily loud, it almost sounded as though it's being played with frustration, notes being frequently missed, strings are screeching now. The pace of it was getting faster and faster. By this time, my dog Jeb out in the backyard had picked up on the situation, registering the unfamiliar sound, giving one solitary deep bark. The violin instantly stopped. The house was dead silent once again. I was still froze to the carpet, and it wasn't until Jeb gave a second menacing bark that I heard the figure outside starting to walk away directly into where I am. Once the first footstep hits the ground, I instantly thought of the welfare of my best mate, and finally, my head connected with extremities and my entire body kicked into overdrive. I left from the ground and slid across the laminated floor to the back door where Jeb was standing, staring into the backyard. I ducked, keeping low, and quietly unlocked the door. Now usually by doing so, I would notify Jeb that he's allowed inside, but when the door opened up, he didn't move an inch, and he was completely fixated on the pitch black backyard. Everything told me not to go outside. There was no chance I was letting anything happen to my dog. I move out slowly, Jeb behind. I put my hand under his collar in an attempt to back him towards the home. Now Jeb is a pure Labrador and weighs a ton and does not want to move. It takes a sheer force to pull him in any direction you want him to go. Jeb's not going anywhere, at least not right now. I yank at him. He emits a bark that I've never heard him do before. A deep bellowing one that somewhat elevates my nerves to an all-time high. We both just stood there, waiting for some form of reply. I can't remember how long, but we both froze there, and eventually, I heard footsteps from around the side of the home, beginning to create dissonance. But not a simple walk. Whoever did so was dancing in a circle. The footsteps are even making a beat as they drift away into the distance, away from the home. Once I couldn't hear anything, Jeb licks his lips, gave me a look, and wanders back inside. I follow, locking the door behind me and spending the night reverting to my childhood self, hiding under my bed with my dog. I do not sleep a wink. That's the last time I ever saw or heard the violin player. The following morning, the sun comes up. I call into work sick and call the police. They launch their investigation. They found that there were so many footprints in the dirt, it would be impossible to figure out who's who. The only thing I could tell them was that they had to be over 6 foot to stare into my fence at me. They also tell me that they've never received a report of anyone playing a violin in the area or near the fenced off hill. I essentially looked like an insane person, but the officers were very nice about the whole thing, offering to patrol the area for the next few nights, which helps put my mind at ease. Nothing else happened since then. A little background on the events I'm about to write about. This all happened in mid-October. My family owns about 160 acres out in the middle of nowhere. The closest neighbour is a friend who we let rent the pasture for his cattle when he needs to. Some friends and I had decided we wanted to build a cabin out here that we could hang out at. So one weekend, one of my friends and I loaded up a tractor that we're renting from his dad and headed out there. It was just me and him that weekend, as everyone else was busy. We got there a little late, since it took a while to get everything loaded up and packed for the weekend. He sat about setting up our tent. I made fire. As I did so, I made an odd discovery. There was a phone book from a few towns over, still in a plastic sleeve, right next to our fire pit. I pick it up and show my friend. We both enjoyed scaring ourselves, and I made the comment that we're not alone out here. We both laughed at it. Later in the night, we're sitting around the campfire talking, and there's a big bright moon above us, with a bit of a breeze that made the leaves wither. There's a weird rustling sound which was creepy but added to our atmosphere. We notice, however, someone crossing through the middle of the field, their body just visible from the moonlight. At first, it's a little odd. My friend and I discussed for a few seconds if we should confront him, but I made the suggestion that he was probably just taking a shortcut through the field, although I didn't really like it. It wasn't a huge deal. If we caught him doing it again, then we'd confront him, we decided. The rest of the night passed pretty uneventfully. We eventually got in our tent and laid down. We're probably 20 or so feet from the fire pit, which by this point is burning quite low. We spoken for a few minutes, then go silent, trying to fall asleep. As we're laying there, we hear something. It sounded like quiet footsteps walking around the fire pit. We both look at each other silent. Then, we hear a piece of wood get thrown to the fire and it flames up a bit. I grab the shotgun I always keep in the tent and quietly rack it. We heard someone run away, but by the time we got out, they were too far away. The rest of the weekend was pretty quiet, and the events of the first night seemed kind of dreamy to us. We just cleared out the area of the cabin, and cut stacked where the trees were for the firewood. Next weekend, we get out there. My uncle's out there as well, and went to check his game cams. This is where it got much worse for us. My uncle told us that he's annoyed. Someone stole the batteries and SD cards from the cameras. We told him about what happened the weekend before and parted ways. When we got out there, we noticed that quite a bit of our wood we had cut and stacked was already gone. And we were the last people to come out of there, which means someone had come out and had the fire for themselves. When we gone and checked on the tractor, which had been left down there, we found it had been broken into, and the chainsaw which we left in the cabin had been stolen. I don't know anything else that this person or these people have done or been doing, but I will keep you all updated. For a bit of context, I grew up in the middle of farmland in a large 1800s Victorian home. Given its history, there's always been several shacks and barns that once belonged to the builder of the home. There's a highway that sees maybe 3 cars on it during the night, directly across from the highway. About 200 feet inward of a cornfield, there's a shack that I've always found creepy. As kids, myself and friends would dare each other to go inside and look, which always ended up with us going as a team. Nothing scary was ever found, maybe a few broken glasses, metal piles and miscellaneous items. There was no electricity of any sort. That kind of made it very far from being homely. Years go by, the existence of the shack becomes a part of my daily life. However, one particular night, as I'm watching TV, I notice a light going off outside of my window. At first I'm startled, but then I dismiss it as passing cars, simply more frequent than they typically are. An hour passes. It's nearing midnight and the light stays on. This time, I know for sure it's coming from outside. My family was asleep, but me being my pansy 16-year-old self, I need confirmation. Too bad for me, no one wants to check it out. I go alone. I grab my pocket knife and flashlight. The best I could think of with my shaken thoughts was that something had took off into the night. As I neared the highway, the light turns off, almost making me choke on air, but I had to figure out what the hell was going on. I make it to the entrance of the shack, which has no door, and begin to slowly enter, my flashlight scanning the room for any sign of life. What happened next, I'll never forget. 5 feet away from me, there's an odd tattered recliner facing away that my father had tossed in there for future disposal. I shine my light on it because I know I'd seen it rock ever so slightly. As it does, a man stands up from the recliner, saying absolutely nothing. All I can tell was that he's middle-aged, wearing a jacket of sorts. Now, I can't process what's happening. I'm already sprinting across the road, praying that he's not behind me. It felt like years before I could make it to my door, but as I'm about to make it into safety, I decide to look back. He's standing in the road completely still now, no words whatsoever. It's been 7 years since then. The shack still stands, the recliner remains in place. My dad never believed me. I wish someone could share the dread I had when I realised the recliner's face in the window, which is staring directly into my home. I live in a ranch-style home in the middle of Missouri on 2 acres of nothing but woods. We bought the house about 2 years ago. The home was vacant for over 8 months before we purchased it, and the realtors had problems with squatters about 3 months into the house being for sale, but said nothing happened since. My elderly grandmother lives with me as I am her caregiver. It's just the 2 of us and our dogs. Now, I moved into the house in October of 2016. The first incident occurred in March 2017. We started seeing a bunch of plastic bags and trash around the back of our home, further out than either of us go. Now, I really didn't think much of it, but made a mental note that raccoons or something had gone through our trash. I put some bungee cords on cans to hold the lids down and wrote it off. One night, I was coming home much later than normal at about 1:30 AM. All of our land is fenced in, but there is one back gate. Near the back gate, I saw a bunch of trees rustling. There's a lot of wildlife in our area, so I assumed that's what it was, but I got that horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach and decided to check it out. The ground was dry enough that I was able to drive through the yard in my car with my doors locked. I shone my headlights on trees. I then see a man coming running out of them. If that wasn't terrifying enough, he ran straight for the gate as if he knew exactly where it was, opened it and left. I was absolutely terrified, so I called my dad who lives in the area. He explained to me how large the population of homeless people is in our area, and that he'd come over to put a gate up. About 2 weeks after the first incident, I was letting my dogs outside. The one had already went inside, the other was playing hard to get as usual. I began calling out her name. It wasn't even dark outside. After about 3 calls, another voice, distinctly male, started calling out her name. She began barking aggressively and running for the home. I was freaked out, but again, let my family talk me out of making a call to the authorities. About a month passes. My grandmother has a habit of forgetting to close the garage door behind her. Now, at some point at around 11 PM, our neighbour from across the street knocks on our door. He says he was outside smoking, and he saw the 2 men standing in our garage talking. He said as soon as he started walking over, they ran off. What scares me the most about this event is they stole nothing, and there was plenty to steal. We have a brand new refrigerator, leaf blower, power tools, and Grandma leaves the keys in the car. They were just talking. This time I called the police, and they told me in the nicest way possible they couldn't do anything. If there was another incident, to call them, and not to scare the men away. The final incident of 2017 happened probably 3 months after the prior one. We have a sun patch attached to the outside of the home. The door connects to the kitchen, and the outside door to the deck. I don't know if I explained it right, and if anyone wants I can show you pictures, but basically, we left for several hours to go grocery shopping. We come home, and all our deck furniture was stacked on top of each other, and the screen ripped off the sun porch door. I then called the emergency line for our area, and again, there's nothing that can be done. About 2 weeks ago now, We had our white vinyl fence power washed. Because the fence is quite old, a post came off the fence and the company that power washes the fence didn't know how to fix it. We left the post in the front yard against the fence. We come home a couple of days later and the post was nailed back up with a smiley face attached to it. I was spooked. Cut to Saturday of last week. My grandmother is able to drive again, but doesn't have her own car. I'm busy working around the home, so she decides to take herself to the doctor. My grandmother leaves the home through our connected door to the garage. I lock it behind her. It never dawns on me to check to make sure she's closed it. About 20 minutes after she leaves, somebody's banging heavily on the door. When I say banging, I mean it appears to be a SWAT team. Someone putting all their force into it. My dogs are going nuts and I don't know what to think. I start to think maybe Grandma left something and is trying to get my attention, but the little voice in the back of my head says, there's no way she's doing that. Suddenly, it stops and I hear a deep laugh. I get my baseball bat out of my bedroom and lock myself in the bathroom with the dogs. I realise I've left my phone outside the bathroom, but I was too afraid to go outside the bathroom to get it. I took the lid of the tank of the toilet seat, so I had two weapons. Nothing happened, and I hid in the bathroom until my grandma was home. Now I know there wasn't some kind of big confrontation or climax, but I know the story's not over yet, and I'm sure these events are connected. I'm going nuts living here. I honestly don't know what to think. I'll update everyone if anything else happens.